Buenas tardes. Everyone is okay? Thank you. Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. Before I start doing any introductions, I do want to highlight the fact that tonight presenting with me was to be the child advocate, Sarah Egan, and I just got off the phone with her. She had a family emergency and may not be able to join us. She is trying to address her situation and may be coming late. If she does not, I of course can summarize the report. Do know that I cannot speak in detail given that it's the Office of the Child's Advocate report. We do have translation available. Tenemos traducción disponible. Shelimar está disponible, ok.
Lo único que tiene que hacer es levantar la mano y ella les entrega el aparatito para que escuchen en español, ¿ok?
So I also want to highlight several of our community partners that are, one, here today, but are also working closely with us in our efforts to cultivate a culture of trust and transparency in response to not only the OCA, but it's also the next level of work that we want to do in our district. So I'm just going to list our partners, our wonderful partners, who are going to also be facilitating and presenting in the other forums coming up. So Hartford Parent University, the Village for Families and Children, the Lighthouse Project at Rawson, Voices for Women of Color, Children's Advocacy Center at St. Francis Medical Center, Catholic Charities, Institute for the Hispanic Family, Padres Abriendo Puertas, Compass Youth Collaborative, Boys and Girls Club of Hartford, City of Hartford, Office of Community Engagement, UConn Center for Health Disparities, Blue Hills Civic Association, Upper Albany NRC, Girls for Technology, and others who support the students and families in the district. Before I review the objectives, I also want to acknowledge Chris Lau, Regional Director for the Department of Children and Families, here tonight, as well as Ann Deneau, an Education Specialist. And they're here as a resource for community concerns. And we know that these are difficult conversations for us, for me as a district leader representing our district, for our staff, for our families, for DCF as well. I have and will continue to say what I say at my own home, right? Blaming doesn't fix it. From now on, what we want to do is make sure that we are transparent and that we take ownership, right, of where we have been and really move forward in service of our children in a collaborative way. So I welcome the Department of Children and Families for being here with us tonight. It certainly is encouraging the willingness for the partnership, so I want to acknowledge that. We have several objectives tonight. To provide an overview of the Office of the Child's Advocate report regarding mandated reporting, as well as the action plan that Hartford Public Schools have put together to respond to the findings. And again, to build a culture of accountability, communication, respect, and safety. And to hear from you, to hear from our community about your concerns, questions, and even ideas as to next steps. As the acting superintendent, as an educator, as a mom, as a former social worker, as a principal, I have said this and I will continue to say that this is saddening. This saddens me. It saddens many of us, given the fact that there were serious failings in our district's procedures, practices, and culture. And while the overwhelming majority of our staff, administrators, our paras, are 110% committed every single day to doing the best in safe and respectful ways, right? There were situations in which we failed, and so we have stepped back, we have owned what happened, and we are here to say that we're aggressively pursuing how to make improvements. we can skip the next slide. I'm going to just keep going. So the child advocate is not here, but I do have some summaries in regard to the report. This is slide 6, by the way. So there were major areas of concern that fell into categories, right? It's a 70-page report, and there was a lot of information and a lot of detail, but there were the major areas include human resources and labor issues, and that's around failures in exercising appropriate diligence and holding staff accountable. So diligence, right, meaning the follow-through. What happened when there was a complaint? What happened when there was an investigation? So there were some failures around those processes. And failure to hold staff accountable, right? What were consequences as a result of those failures? Specifically, failure to exercise appropriate diligence in review and action of allegations against a staff member back in 2007, and failures to hold those accountable in relation to that incident. Also, another area is around policy and compliance. Failures to update and disseminate board policy and complying with the mandatory child abuse and neglect reporting requirements. There's not only a moral meaning that it's the right thing to do, but there's also a statutory requirement, right? There are laws that exist to protect. And so there were failures around that as well. Staff failure to comply uniformly with the mandatory abuse and neglect requirements. So uniformly meaning across the system. And then also failure to comply with best practices. What tells us works best in efforts to uphold and stay true to these requirements. Another area was concerns about special vulnerability of children with special needs and disabilities. And what that whole finding indicated is that some of our staff had difficulties in responding to the needs of our students. And so that's hard for us to hear, right? We want to make sure that all of our students are educated and are cared for in the best possible way. But you know, we know that our most vulnerable students, our students with disabilities, require oftentimes additional and or different techniques, right? And so there was an area in which it was found that we need additional knowledge and training as to how to best serve our students with special needs. Another area is professional development. That is how we as a district or an organization develop or provide training, provide extra support for the adults, right? The people that make the magic happen, as I call it, the people that in the classrooms make teaching and learning come alive. There were also concerns there as well around programming and training and not enough understanding about reporting and specifically around Title IX obligations. And I'll speak a little more about that in the when I talk about the action plan. And there was also a concern about whether or not our district has the capacity, whether or not we can do this work, whether or not we can fix it. There was a concern in the report that spoke to, given that this happened over multiple years, is the district able to implement the responses and monitor the actions? And lastly, one other area that was alluded to, it was highlighted in the report, but we as the district felt that was going to be our through line, right? The way in which we're going to address all of the concerns, and that's around family and community partnerships. Making sure that we're transparent and accountable. And I often talk about holding all of us accountable at all levels of the organization, all the way up, right, to the superintendent and then to our board, right? Because I talked about policy, board sets policy, right? And so throughout the whole organization, we have to hold everyone accountable. And in terms of the family and community partnerships, we want to do that in a way that we are informed by experts. You, our parents and our families, experts about your children, right? And so we need you to help inform our practice. So that's also at the center of our plan moving forward. The action plan had many details. Next slide. And I know that there were a lot of documents out there, but I'm gonna just try to summarize the action plan. And I talked about culture, and a definition of culture is how things kind of shape, right? The way we do things around here. You ever heard about that? People say it's just the way things are around here, the way we do things around here. And no one often says, well, the way we do it is X, Y, and Z, but like people know how things are. And so we're saying this is not the culture that we want to have in our organization. Not a culture where we don't hold each other accountable, not a culture in which children's safety, their well-being is number one, right? That's the culture that we want to build. And so in order to start doing that, that requires that there's immediate reporting, right? We have to start there. Immediately reporting suspected child abuse and neglect. And that's all staff members. We've communicated that we cannot hesitate. We don't need to investigate. We just have to report. And we have to do so immediately. Also, it's accountability. We have to hold people accountable. And we've begun to do that in separate ways. We talked about that any inappropriate conduct toward children entrusted in our safety will not be tolerated and will result in discipline. And failure to report will also result in discipline. And I've had some conversations with people where they say, well, is that all you're going to do? You're just going to discipline people? And it's not just about that, right? That's what the law says we have to do, right? We have to report. And when you get clear about the expectations and you hold people accountable and you follow through and you're consistent, that's when behavior starts to change. And that's when we change culture. That's where people begin to think, oh, that's how we do things around here. We are in the process of conducting a review and making programmatic improvements to our training. I will say that 95% of our staff have been trained, and there's the 5% that are in the process of being trained, and that includes people that are either part-timers or are newly hired. So we've been working diligently around that. I spoke about taking extra care for our children with disabilities. And we have partnered with the Center for Children with Special Needs. They're experts in this field, and they're conducting an evaluation of the current services that we have for our students with autism. What we've asked them to do is to identify areas that we can improve and get better. The action plan calls for the Board of Education in its oversight role to review and let us know about the policies, right? We want to make sure that we're aligned to what the statute says, and that's responsibility of the board. We will have an outside review conducted of our human resources function. It's really important for us, for the Board of Ed and myself as superintendent, to be kept informed of all personnel issues. And we also need to make sure that we have the ability and the resources to hold people accountable for any wrongful actions. It is also critically important that we're transparent, because transparency builds trust, right? If we communicate about the what and the how, that's when we know that we can build trust. And so the Office of the Child Advocate advised and continues to advise us around having an outside independent monitor. We will retain a monitor for the action steps in the plan and to report publicly to you, to our public, to our community, and to the board around our efforts. And it's going to be an ongoing dialogue as well between the monitor, the Child Advocate's Office, the Department of Children and Families, the State Department of Education, and others, so that we can learn from their expertise as we continue to get better. And a very important part for us is that we see all of these efforts to involve the entire school community, starting with clear communication of the problems and our commitment to address those problems. So we're going to continue to hold these forums and these community conversations. And some of the conversations are going to be hard conversations, right? We have our next community conversation, and when we talk about abuse and neglect, we know that can bring up, right, a lot of challenging and painful feelings. And so we're enlisting our partners, our experts, to help us work through that. We are engaging our students. I'll talk in a little bit about a pledge that we're making and a whole campaign that we want students to be at the center of creating. And we'll continue to hear you and what you have to tell us. We want to make sure that as we continue to do this work, we also are informed about trauma and trauma-informed practices, right? We know that many of our children experience trauma, and so they show up. Our children show up in a specific way when they have stressors in their life, or when they have some concerns or worries. That gets in the way of learning. And so how is it that we are giving our teachers the tools so that they can help our students from that trauma lens? That is an overview of the action plan, and it's almost like if it was on cue, because I mentioned earlier that the child advocate, Sarah Egan, had a family emergency, and she was going to try to do her best to be here, and sure enough, she is here. Wow, thank you. Before I go on to talk about how we're going to organize ourselves for the work, I'm actually going to ask Sarah Egan, the child advocate, to come up when she's ready. Maybe she needs a few minutes. You're good. And then I'm going to ask, after Sarah Egan, our board chair, Mr. Stallings, to also say a few words.
Is this mic'd? This is on mic'd.
Is it this mic or this mic? The one I'm holding?
I have holding. Okay. Hi. I'm Sarah Egan from the Office of the Child Advocate, and I'm sorry that I'm late to join everybody today. I feel like I'm really far away from everybody. Okay, is it okay if I walk up a little bit closer? I feel a bit like Oprah with this mic up here, but I just feel like I'm sort of too far away, and I'm just going to take this big sip of water since I just ran to get here. Sorry. So I just want to thank everyone for inviting me to participate in this forum tonight. I really want to thank all of you for being here. I'm glad to see so many people from the community for this conversation. I'm really glad to be part of it. So I run the state's Office of the Child Advocate. I just want to tell you a little bit about who I am, what our office does, and then what our report was about that folks are here to talk about. And I'm here to answer any questions that you might have of me. So I'm a lawyer, and I've been running the state's Office of the Child Advocate for about 3.5 years. The Office of the Child Advocate is what we'd call an independent watchdog agency, which means it's an independent state agency, and its job is to advocate for kids, look at how well services for kids are working, keeping kids safe, and make recommendations for improvement. So sometimes what we do is we help an individual family that calls who's worried about a child, and sometimes what we do is an investigation of a complaint, and sometimes what we do is an investigation of a kind of big issue, a system issue, a facility, or something like that. Before I came to the Office of the Child Advocate, I was a lawyer for kids, all different ages, from baby to 20-something years old, in all different areas. Most often kids who were had suffered abuse or neglect and needed help around a variety of issues. Sometimes school issues, sometimes housing, sometimes immigration, sometimes things involving DCF. So that's what I did at a place called the Center for Children's Advocacy for many years before I came to the Office of the Child Advocate. So why we wound up doing an investigation into some of the things we're here to talk about tonight is that last year, and Dr. Torres-Rodriguez may have covered, where did she go? She's behind me, hi. She may have covered some of this, but last year, the mayor of Hartford, Luke Bronin, asked our office to look at some of the practices and policies of the Hartford Public Schools when it comes to mandated reporting of child abuse or neglect. And what that means is that there are state laws, as I'm sure many of you know, but just in case some of you do not know, there are state laws that say when any person who's what's called a mandated reporter, that's going to be just about everybody in a school system, a healthcare provider, and lots of other types of folks in the community who interact with kids a lot. When a mandated reporter has a suspicion, not that they know, not that they have investigated, but when they have a suspicion that a child may have been abused or neglected, the law says that that mandated reporter has to contact the Department of Children and Families within 12 hours, or law enforcement, within 12 hours by phone to say something, right? And those laws are in place because, for obvious reasons, but also because children cannot advocate for themselves often. And as I've said, talking to people about our work, it's not often that a child will come to anybody and say, please help me, I'm abused or neglected. Or go home from school and say, Mom, I'm being abused in school, please call. So it's really important that adults who are charged with caretaking for kids, when they have a suspicion that a child needs help, that they are calling and letting appropriate authorities like DCF know. So that's part of what we were looking at, and as many of you, now all of you know, we were looking at that because there had been a high-ranking administrator in the school system here who had been alleged to have inappropriate contact with a minor. And that was widely reported on, and there was an arrest in conjunction with that, so that's what we looked at. And as many of you may know, what we found was, not good. So what we found a couple of things, and I'll just go through the brief highlights. So we did find that the school system, the school district, that their policies on mandated reporting were not up to date with what the law requires. We found that the individual, the administrator that folks were concerned about, had sort of hung around the district for a while and had a history of some documented concerns about his behavior. We found more broadly, and I think part of what we're here to talk about, is we found that when we started looking at it, were there any other allegations of suspected abuse or neglect of a child at the hands of a school employee? How were those allegations handled? Were they handled properly? Were they reported in proper ways and in proper time frames? And sometimes we found that the answer to that was yes, and sometimes we found that the answer to that was no. And so we started to really dig in on those issues and taking very seriously any time when a child may be abused in school, what is happening, or neglected, why is that happening, who knows about it, who should be reporting. And so some of what we found is that we did find a lot of examples looking at records, child welfare records and school records over a 3-year period, We did unfortunately find several examples where children were placed at risk, where there was a concern that they might be abused or neglected, and where authorities were not called in a prompt fashion. We found other examples where people did do what they were supposed to do, and children were protected in the way that they're supposed to be. So this was really concerning to us. We also found that, the children that we were looking at, that most of the children who were the subjects of some of the reports that we looked at were children with specialized needs. And that's always very worrisome. I'll tell you something that's not unique to Hartford, right? So we know that both in Hartford, in Connecticut, and around the country, the most likely children to be vulnerable to different types of abuse or neglect are children with specialized needs. And they're often younger children, and they often may be children who have challenging communication issues, who may not be able to communicate, or who have challenging behavior as a result of things that they've experienced in their lives. Sometimes we found that children were at risk because of a lack of proper supervision or appropriate supports for teachers or staffing. So there were different issues that we were concerned about. So we brought all of these issues to the attention of city leadership and to the attention of the Department of Children and Families, who I can see is also here today, and also to the school district leadership. In doing our report, we looked at a lot of records. We talked to a lot of people, often confidentially, to try to gather information about these concerns. What I also want to say that in looking and in doing our investigation, we saw that a lot of teachers really work hard to keep kids safe, that a lot of times it was school employees who might be advocating for a child, particularly a child with special needs, both to get the resources that they needed and to make sure that they had the protections that they needed. So while there were certainly incidents of concern that are really important, we also saw school employees who really went the extra mile for kids as well. And so I think that that's something that we were glad to see, and I think is a really important strength to build on in the district. So I think that we found the concerns that we developed really they're serious. Anytime you have a weakness in a system when it comes to what I'd call transparency and accountability for ensuring children's safety, that's number one. That's number one. And one of the things we said in our report is that we can never have a situation where a parent or a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt or whoever it is that's responsible for a child is receiving their child back from school and is worried about their safety or is worried about an injury that they may have suffered and they don't know what happened to them, whether they got hurt by another child, whether something was an accident, whether something else happened. Right? We just cannot have that happen to kids, and we can't have families go through that anguish for their loved ones. So so we take it very seriously, and as I know all of you do too. And I think that so I have some of what I have to say tonight is bad, right? I mean, look, the report, the findings were not good. But I also really want to say part of why I wanted to be here tonight is that I have also, our office's job is to investigate problems. So we're never investigating good things. We're only investigating bad things. People only call our office when there's something bad going on, right? Nobody calls the Office of the Child Advocate to say, I just really wanted you to know about these great things happening that you don't know about, right? They call to say, you really need to look at this or that, or this child's not safe, or this child's needs are not getting met. So, so that's part of what we found here. But I also really wanted to be here today to express some confidence in the response that I know that I got from the city and from the school district, particularly from folks sitting up here today. When we brought these concerns to them, they had a lot of choices. They could say, well, we don't think it's as bad as you say. We think it's a little problem, not a big problem. We like your recommendations, but we're not going to do all of them. And that's not what they said. What they said was, we agree it's a really big problem, and we're going to do everything that we can to make up for it. And if that means going to community meetings, it means being watched. If it means having the Office of the Child Advocate hang around us for the next year to keep watching us, we want to do those things. And as an advocate for kids, I do think that matters a lot. It really made a big difference to me. It made me feel like, made me feel some confidence that these problems were really going to be taken seriously. And I also think even in the last month or two, since we released the report to Hartford, that they've already been doing a lot of the things, they've already been doing things to address some of the problems. They've already been doing a lot of the recommendations that we asked. And they've continued to invite my office and me personally to participate in the problem-solving process. And I think that that's really important. And I think that we all have to hold ourselves and this district accountable as we move forward to make the improvements that we need to make to ensure all of our kids are safe and that our schools have the resources that they need to make sure kids get what they need in a safe way. So that was a lot for me. I know I tried to cover a lot, and I'm really glad. sorry I was late tonight. It was a family thing, happens, and I feel somewhat dressed inappropriately. But I didn't want to miss it. I'm really glad to be here with all of you. I have young kids in school. I have a child with special needs in school who's nonverbal, so I can appreciate the vulnerability of a lot of your kids and students in general. I've spent a lot of time advocating for kids in school systems, so these issues are really close to my heart, and I can really promise to you that we're going to stick with it and make sure that we're seeing the improvements that our kids and families deserve. And when it comes to kids' safety, there's no buts about it, right? That's number one. So I'm really glad DCF is here. I'm really glad Hartford invited me. I'm really glad you all are here. So I guess that's it from me until folks have any questions.
So I am going to call up for a few words our board chair, Mr. Stallings. And as I mentioned earlier, right, so we're all holding ourselves accountable. And there's accountability at all levels of the district. And that begins with our, the policy, right, and the oversight. And so Mr. Stallings, on behalf, I'm sure, of the board, you can address us tonight. And then he'll join myself and the child advocate for Q&A, question and answers.
Thank you, Dr. Torres. Good evening. Hi, my name is Craig Stallings. I'm getting used to the new position, so forgive me. Generally, I'm off the cuff, very blunt kind of a person. That's not going to change. I just need to make sure that I'm considerate of the other 8 members of the board. So I just want to say thank you again. As a parent, I was devastated and offended by the findings of this report. I think safety in our schools is the most important thing. We send our children to school. We believe that they're going to be safe. We believe they're going to be educated. And this report was devastating, but not surprising. And not surprising to many of us who are products of the system and who've been dealing with the system for a long time. So we know that there's been historic and generational inequities for years that we need to get to. For me, in my personal opinion, the report gave a little insight into why our children are having difficult times in school, why we're having so much disagreement in the community, and why our community is the way it is. And if you don't feel safe in school and you don't feel that you are a part of the school community, you drop out. You reject what's going on there, and then the next thing you know, we have our young people in the street, and then you have the murders, and you have the violence and things of that nature. And with the last homicide down the street, again, from my perspective, that's our fault. It's not the police's fault. It's not the community's fault as much as it's our fault, because we're responsible for your babies. We're responsible for our babies to make sure that they're educated and they're safe and that they believe in themselves and they believe that they're a part of a community that values them, and we don't show or value our children enough. There is institutional violence, there's educational violence in terms of just inequities of resources and funding. That contributes a lot to how we handle our issues in school and how we get together and try to solve problems for our children. From an oversight perspective, we fell asleep on the job. We did not do enough to provide enough oversight in terms of making sure that we were on top of our policy, to make sure that we governed in a correct fashion, and I'm here to take full responsibility for that. I cannot run from that. The only thing I can say to you is we're going to do better from this point forward. We're going to make sure that we are more legislative and more deliberate in our process. We're going to lead one another. We're going to listen and engage actively. And when you actively listen, when you involve yourself, when you lend yourself to the conversation, that's the only way that we can have a productive give and take, a productive conversation. And so I'm very thankful, Dr. Torres, for this forum, and I know you have many more. But I just want to say, from a board standpoint, that we understand the problems. We are just as concerned as you are. We are just as offended as you are. And what we want to do is we want to do a better job as making sure that we are engaging people, that we use our committees, that we are vetting things, that we are getting input on new recommendations and new proposals. So bear with me. It's going to be a rocky road. We have a lot of tough decisions coming up. One of our first decisions, major decisions, is selecting superintendent. That should happen by the 4th. So we are pretty close to making that decision. So please stay tuned, bear with me. Thank you for coming. I appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to answering questions, engaging you. I also want to apologize for being late. I had other meetings that I ran over, similar to some of these other social issues that we were talking about and we will be discussing today. So again, thank you so much. I'm proud that you're all here. Hopefully at the next meeting, we all bring at least 5 more people so that we can seriously start to build capacity in our community, generate a lot more awareness of what's going on, and start to try to establish positive relationships with one another. So thank you so much, Dr. Torres.
You go to slide 9 quickly. Oh, I have to make an announcement. Silver Honda Civic. I've never made those kind of announcements. This is exciting. Silver Honda Civic is outside and is blocking someone. Don't know who that is, but we have a parent that needs to go. Okay, so what you have here, and I don't know how it looks in your package, but this is our effort to capture how we're organizing the implementation of the action plan. You know, when we got the report and we saw 70 pages, how are we going to put this all together into an action plan? This is our way to speak to the structure that I referenced not too long ago. This is just a visual for those of us that learn in that way. So at the top, you see that we're going to have an independent monitor. And that's the person or the entity, the group, that's going to make sure that we do what we say we were going to do. That monitor is going to be informed by a monitoring advisory group. And we believe in being informed by experts, and we said that we're going to come at this from a learner perspective as well. And so we're considering the advisory group as a composite of representatives from the district, representatives from the Office of the Child Advocate, the Board of Education, the State Board of Education, our board, and our mayor's office. And there's a list there of our action groups. We have people in our district inside that have leads to doing the work of those areas that I referenced. And then to the right is, again, our commitment to the family and the community engagement that we spoke about. At the bottom is organizational redesign. and cultural and systemic improvements. That's a fancy way of saying that what we commit to is long-term progress, long-term change, right? That making sure that all of these improvements, holding people accountable, making sure that we keep kids and our children safe in everything that we do, that we hold ourselves to a higher level of excellence, that becomes the culture. With regards to safety, with regards to teaching and learning, with regards to how we engage our community, that's how we're going to transform the organization. I know we want to get to the question and answers, but I wanted to give a few progress updates thus far. It's been about, maybe a month and a few weeks that the report was released, and we've been diligently trying to improve. And in terms of the policy and the compliance, we've communicated with the community. We've sent letters. We've sent a package to our principals, letting them know to engage their staff. There's been training. We've engaged with students. Our students know they had an overview of what happened and how did we go wrong, and what it is that we're doing to really regain the trust of our students as well, by the way. There's, at central office, at the district level, there's a central repository function. And what that means is that I have collaborated with our human resources department, and whenever there's an investigation that has taken place, I'm made aware. Those practices were not as consistent before, they are now. And we're making sure that while someone does the investigation, that my office is always kept in the loop. And that's very important. I will also say, and I don't know if I can speak for DCF, but I will say that there has been changes also in their practices in how we're communicating as well. And I need to highlight and appreciate that as well. With regard to human resources and labor, there's been disciplinary action that has had to be taken in regard to violations and employees violating in different cases in regards to reporting abuse and neglect. I spoke about the special vulnerability of children and how we are doing a comprehensive evaluation of our programming. We've also done crisis prevention, intervention training. That's our restraint and seclusion training. We've done that with our crisis teams, our behavior technicians, our ABA staff, and in our professional development, I referenced earlier that 95% of our staff have received mandated reporting training. And we continue to retrain. We continue to retrain our administrators. One of the things that we found is that though we say and our principals know that they have to report immediately, they want to talk through some of these cases. They're difficult cases to understand sometimes, and so there's a lot of conversation that we're engaging with our principals around that. And of course, family and community partnerships. And you'll get to hear more as we go through these forums and making sure that you're at the center of all of that, so that you inform us around your family, your needs, and the impact, right? The impact that child abuse, neglect, and or trauma has. Okay. So that's our overview. I am going to open time for conversation, questions, comments, and Sarah Egan is here, available. Mr. Stallings, in case anyone has questions from a board perspective as well. And we raise your hand and then we can get a mic over to you. Yes.
Ms. Torres, I want to know in this report, with all those people that did all the neglecting and the abuse, and the one person was held responsible for what he did, which he should have been, are they going to fire those staff and everybody else that was involved from 2006 to 2016 for the neglect and not reporting, because it's not like they did not know that they were supposed to report. It's not like they did not know what was going on. If it was their children that had to go through what these babies went through, they would have been pushing for whoever did it to get fired too. All they're pushing to not retrain, because they were trained before. They knew what they were supposed to do before this thing here happened. Are they going to fire them from 2006 till whenever the end of their report was?
So I'll say a couple things, and I know that Sarah can offer some information as well. But one of the findings is that they were not trained properly, right? That some of our staff that we were not adhering to policy, and so there were some failures on our side, right, in terms of that. Having said that, I know in regard to the reporting. The silver Honda is still blocking. So the question was, what's going to happen to some of these people that were... So I will also say that currently we do not have anyone in the district working that has been substantiated of abuse and neglect. So I need to clarify, we have reviewed that there is no one that has been substantiated of abuse and neglect. However, I do know that there are laws that protect with regard to when someone makes a report and they are, when you don't identify yourself, anonymous. And so what are the implications around that? The question is, sometimes we don't know who's making the report. The question is, are we able to go back and fire those people? And so they're not working in the system anymore, right? And so, nor the people that are here have not been substantiated. I don't know if that answers your question or if there's a better way.
Well, I think that, I think it's a really good question. I think it's a really important question.
They need the detox.
And I don't think there's a great answer to your question. I'm just going to be really candid about that because, and these are some of the conversations that we continue to have, and one of the really important issues that my office continues to look at and examine with state and local officials, which is the question of accountability, both going forward, but also looking back. And I do think that there are some holes around accountability. I mean, I can't sit up here and say that there aren't, because there are. And one of the concerns that we had doing our review is that there's a lot of people who behave who may or alleged to behave in a way with a child or a student that may not lead to a finding that they abused or neglected that student, i.e. a substantiation, which could lead to somebody getting fined, right? But sometimes it doesn't get all the way there, right? Sometimes it's just behavior that I, Dr. Torres-Rodriguez or others would not want to have happen to a child. It may not be substantiated by DCF, but it still happened, or we're still concerned it happened. And I think that that's most often what we're talking about, right? And that's most often what we found in our report. And I think a really important question is, what do we do about that, right? So I think in that there's a role for DCF in terms of its ability to hold folks accountable and substantiate, its ability to express concerns to the school district and stay part of that conversation. I think that needs work, right? But also work for the school district to say, even if you're not substantiated by DCF, that type of behavior, screaming at kids, whatever it is, that's not acceptable. Like that can't happen. We don't shame children, right? And I don't think it's acceptable. I know Dr. Torres-Rodriguez doesn't think it's acceptable. We saw a lot of that, right? And so I think your question is, well, what are you going to do in terms of going back and looking at all those people who may not have been substantiated, but who maybe did stuff that we're not okay with? And I think that that's a fair question, and I think that all does have to be looked at, both going forward, but also looking back. And if there are barriers to holding people accountable and taking sort of a zero tolerance approach to, I don't know what the word I would use here, but not treating children the way they should be treated. If there are barriers to accountability, then we have to be honest about what those barriers are, and we have to address them. And I think that there are perceived barriers to that. Like, I'm just going to be really honest here, because we're here to be really honest with each other. I feel like, right? And I think one of the perceived barriers is that it's hard to discipline an employee, right? Because if people have contracts and people have protections, and and I think that that's a perceived barrier. I don't think it's a real barrier, right? All of us are held accountable, right, in our jobs and in our daily lives, and we have to figure out how, as a district, we can't, and any district, not just Hartford, right? I have some of the same concerns in other districts, right? What are the barriers to taking a zero tolerance approach? It is not okay to line up kindergartners, this is an example from another school district, and scream at them because, at recess time because of A, B, C, or D. Like, that's not okay. Is that abuse? Am I going to call Chris Lau about it? Well, maybe. But whether I do or I don't, that's not okay. And these are the conversations that we need to have. And just circling back to something that Dr. Torres-Rodriguez was talking about, training, and I don't want to do any more of the talking, it's just a really important question, and I want to give it a good answer, is what does it mean to meaningfully train somebody? So I can say, here's what the law says, you're supposed to report, you're not supposed to investigate, you're supposed to report reasonable suspicion of abuse and neglect to DCF or to the police. But what does that mean in real life? Sometimes it's really obvious, and sometimes it's not. And like I said before, in all of my years representing children, no child has ever come to me and said, Attorney Egan, help me, I'm being abused. Like, nobody says that. Kids don't talk that way. They say nothing. They say, I'm really uncomfortable. I don't want to go with him. They say, they maybe just avoid certain people or avoid going to school. What do we do as adults with that information? What if you hear a rumor as a teacher, as a gym teacher, you hear a rumor that so-and-so is driving the 12-year-old girls home from school in the front of his car, blaring inappropriate music, right? Well, what do I do with that? Is that true? Does that mean something bad? Where do I go with that rumor? And I think these are the day-to-day things that are actually not easy. And so when we train employees, we have to be thinking in terms of what are the real things that are going to come up in their day-to-day life. What if I'm the paraprofessional and I'm out in the hallway with a child and I see another teacher, and maybe I know their name, maybe I don't, chasing some kid down the hallway, screaming at him, maybe using words they're not supposed to, and then grab the child in a way that makes me uncomfortable. And I'm not the principal. I'm an aide, right? I'm not that teacher's supervisor. Do I say something? Who do I report that to? Am I going to get in trouble? What if I report it and then nothing happens? Right? So these are the real barriers to children's safety, from accountability to knowing what to report, to feeling safe to report, that I think we have to both as a community but also within the district have honest conversations about. Because preventing and responding to child abuse and neglect is not always easy. Right? And I think we have to be honest about what's hard about it and then be better. So that's a lot for me, but I thought it was a really good question.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Maria Cruz, and I'm here. I just bumped into this meeting because I've been trying to get somebody to hear me out. I saw her the other night at MD Fox, and I was trying to get to that list, and my name couldn't get on the list. I'm here because zero tolerance, what does that mean? Because to me, zero tolerance means zero tolerance, okay? My son has been abused, harassed, stabbed, kicked, taken stuff from, robbed. Kids even come to my house and took his Xbox. I've called Board of Education, Special Ed. I called the Hartford Police Department. I work for specialty transportation. I work for them. Training, we get no training. We don't get no training. Our training is our life experience training, okay? So if I'm motherly, then I treat the kids with motherly care. If I'm aggressive, I'm just saying to, other people, they're aggressive, they give them aggressive care. I've come to my boss and I said to her, listen, my son reported in front of DCF that he was stabbed on the bus. This is what she said. Well, if you can tell me the date and time, then we could look for that incident. But if you can't tell me the date and time, we can't do nothing. But if I don't wear my seatbelt 3 months ago and they want to fire me, they could go 3 months back and I could get fired. So my son is not important. Then my son is on a bus with X amount of kids with all type of different behavior, okay? Now to me, I've come to the conclusion that it's all about money. Because they could separate these kids, but they choose not to save $1. My thing is, my son don't have a price. He's priceless to me. And if somebody's gonna protect him, it's gonna be me. Now, if my son comes home and he gets withdrawn, he doesn't want to eat, but he's gaining weight. I want you to picture this, 50 pounds in 1 year, okay? My son gained. He can't go to nobody because nobody listens. Now he thinks this is a way of life. Mommy, don't say nothing because they're gonna get me more. I've confronted the kid through the phone because as a specialty transportation, I can't have no interact with him. I was off duty and I got written up. Now, his father went on the bus and told him, leave my son alone. My son coming home with black eyes, busted lips. Friday, I had to take him to the emergency room. He got dragged by 2 monitors, supposedly trained, okay? Supposedly trained. I want to know what the training is. Because for a special ed child to be dragged off the bus, and I have witnesses, it's not that I'm just talking. For you to drag him off the bus and leave him in front of my doorstep and take off, that's a problem, okay? Y'all didn't do nothing about the stab. Now y'all letting, and while they holding him, the boy that he having the altercation with is punching him in his face. So they cover it by the way they put the writing. A child was interfering. Don't tell me a child was interfering. Tell me what the child was doing. Report what really happened.
So I want to respond to several things that you've said. The first thing that I'll say is you said, my child's safety is my responsibility or something like that. I'm actually going to say that is a shared responsibility. Right? I know, right, that's your baby, but we as educators and as the people that are responsible for your child during the day, we share that responsibility. So I just needed to say that first. I'm not familiar with the case. I do have people here that will certainly hear you, but I also want to ask a question, and maybe Dr. Torres-Rodriguez can address the specialty transportation and how that works, and in terms of complaints and things like that. What I just want to make sure that you hear me is the commitment to, when we talk about zero tolerance and making sure that we investigate everything and making sure that we follow through, that's the commitment going forward. And so do know that that's what we're wanting to do, but please continue to let us know, right? And I don't know if Dr. Torres-Rodriguez, you can address because it's a valid concern, right? So we're doing our training. What's the role of specialty transportation in their training?
Absolutely, and it's a valid, and thank you for asking the question and bringing the information. So we have a contract with specialty transportation, and we have been asking them, you have to understand that there is a contract and everyone agreed to that contract, and we're coming at the tail end of the contract, but we're asking specialty to actually create an action plan for monitoring and monitors, for training, and not only we're asking them, we're offering them the opportunity for us to actually train the monitors so that the responsibility become a mutual responsibility. So not because it's their contract and it's our contract with them, it's our responsibility to make sure that the monitors really understand what to do and how to do certain things, especially when we're dealing with children. So we're looking into that, and thank you for bringing that to our attention.
So please do make sure you don't leave tonight without us speaking with you. Thank you. Miss Natalie? Does anyone have a mic? Okay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Natalie Langles, and my question is, if someone, per se a teacher or principal, has been brought up for child abuse, my question is, why would the school system allow them to retire with payment without being reprimanded? We are just allowing a perpetrator to go to another district and be employed. And where safety is concerned, I always think of my immediate community, but hoping to impact, broader and broader regions. And so I am hoping that in the future, this is something that we definitely would be addressing. Thank you very much.
So if that is a special case that you know about, I know that I know our partnership, Miss Natalie, and I know you will let me know if there's something that I don't know. Know that. So if you have information that I'm not aware of, and that if there's an investigation that has to happen, let me know. And that's a challenge. Sarah Egan spoke about, there are contracts and there are things that kind of get in the way. I will tell you that I am committed to making sure that we hold people accountable. Now, there are bargaining units, right? And they push back because they have a membership, right? And they have to protect or serve their membership. I get that. But this is health safety, right? And it is a non-negotiable. And so I know that I'm going to make sure that I do everything that I can as the leader of the district to ensure that we investigate fully and we do our due diligence around that.
So I think that question hits on some of the same issues that Ms. Neffer was asking about before, which is about accountability for behavior, right? And I think, so one of the things you asked about is somebody who does something in one district and then goes and moves on somewhere else. So do I think that happens? I absolutely know that happens, right? And it's a problem. And I think I was just meeting with one of our state reps here today, who's here in the red sweater, talking to somebody else. But she and I were meeting today to talk about this issue, about accountability, and about filling in some holes in the law that allow some of that to take place. So I do think that there are some fixes in the law to make it harder there's a couple things. One, to make it harder for a person to move from district to district in that way, right? I would like to see the law changed, state law changed, to say that when somebody is applying for a job at a new school district, that school district has to ask for whether they've ever been reprimanded due to any concerns that impact the health and safety of a child, and separate it out from whether DCF has investigated or whether there's been a substantiation, so that even if that it didn't go that far, if they've been reprimanded for that, first of all, that's a public document. But I don't think that it's always accessed, but it could be, right? And it should be, and I think we should mandate that, right? So I think that's one. The other piece that I'm concerned about that I think your question raises is, what are parents' rights to know? What are communities' rights to know when there's been concerns raised about an employee or about a program, right? So some of the things we talked about in our report had to do with not necessarily one individual teacher or someone else who was abusive, but kids who were being harmed because the program was inadequate, right? There's not enough teachers. I think one of the examples, if you read our report, had to do with a little boy at another Hartford school who had significant disabilities, who was supposed to have a one-to-one, but didn't, right? And he got away. He went into the locker room because everybody was in gym, and the back door of the locker room was open, and he was found blocks away. It's a 5-year-old boy, right? And that could have been really bad, right? So it wasn't like one person. It was a programmatic problem that could have led to a very serious problem, right? And so one of the things that was really bothering me is in looking at that is then, so DCF looked at that. That was not a case that was reported quickly to DCF. DCF found out about that later. They came in, DCF said, look, you got to call us about that right away. They didn't substantiate any person for neglect because it wasn't one person. It's not the woman in the gym class who's got like all these kids to watch, right? So then they send a letter to Hartford Public Schools superintendent, different superintendent before Dr. Torres-Rodriguez, and they say, look, we're really concerned about this because this is not the first type of complaint we've made, and it jeopardized the welfare of this child. And we've brought other concerns about staffing and supervision. So my question becomes, who gets to know about that concern? So if that's the fourth time that DCF has sent a letter to the superintendent about something, and I'm a parent of a child in that program, do I get to know? So right now, parents' right to know under our current law when it comes to school is pretty limited, right? If it's a child welfare letter, then it doesn't go to parents. If it's a child welfare record, it doesn't go to parents. Not because DCF doesn't want to give it to you, but because the law says it's a child welfare records are private. So, well, does the letter go to the State Department of Education? Do they then say, oh, we have a problem, I want you to follow up? No, because we don't have it. It should. Right, that's an easy change in the law we can make, right? Just like I've been saying to people, like we regulate a nursing home that can be fined for not providing appropriate supervision, and then somebody breaks, hurts something, and I can look up that information about nursing homes. I can look up some of that information about a daycare. Citations, fines, corrective actions. We should be able to, consumers have that right to know here too. So I think that there are specific things that we can, outside of just Hartford, that we can tighten up in our state laws and regulations that hold us more accountable and more transparent, right? Because I know if I'm a parent of a program that's been investigated by a state agency for concerns of child safety and I am not told about it, I said to my husband there'd be a hole in the ground where the school used to be, right? Because that's not okay. And so if there are barriers in the law to sharing information in a responsible way with stakeholders, then we have to address that.
So just want to respond to, actually I have a question first. You said in terms of laws that would require a district to know if someone was substantiated before?
Well, we already have that law.
Can you speak to that law, actually? Or that process?
Right, yes, I hope so, boy. So there is actually a relatively new, so one, if somebody's on the central registry, any employer for a school is going to have access to that. But somebody who gets substantiated for abuse or neglect does not always wind up on the state central registry. So a district has to make sure it's obtaining that information, a new district, if somebody's going to a new district. There is a new state law from last year that requires that when an applicant is seeking employment in a new school district, that the receiving district, the hiring district, has to ask for any information or discipline about a person being substantiated for abuse or neglect, or if the person resigned or left during an investigation for abuse or neglect. So that has to go over, and I think that's a really good new law. I think the piece that's missing from it that we have to add is leave the substantiation to the side, because we're talking about a lot of misconduct that somebody may be disciplined for, but they don't get substantiated for by DCF. What I want to make sure is that the district is asking for, I want to make sure two things. I want to make sure that districts are disciplining people who engage in that type of mistreatment of a child, and I want to make sure that new districts are asking for that information, so that we don't have somebody in District A who's sort of repeatedly a problem and we're worried about, and I don't really want him in his classroom, and we finally get him to leave and he just goes to District B, right? Which I know happens, right? We don't want that to happen. So I think there are some things we could do to fix that.
And I also want to respond to the programmatic concerns. And previously, there wasn't a process in the district for us to kind of close the loop, right? That means when DCF would send us these programmatic concerns, there wasn't a way for the district to say, okay, so we got this letter, it gives a description of what the concerns are, and sometimes even suggestions for how they should be addressed. There wasn't a way for the district to go back, for example, to the principal and say, okay, we got the letter, now what are we going to do about it? So as of the first week of January, we have a process in place in which as soon as we get from DCF the programmatic concerns, so it goes to the principal gets a copy, the assistant superintendent gets a copy, our human resources department gets a copy, and then I also get a copy. And on a weekly basis, I do meet with representatives from the human resource department to understand what those programmatic improvements have been. I'll give you an example. We had a situation in which there was no substantiation, but a staff member used a racially charged statement, made a racially charged statement towards a student, and although there was no substantiation of abuse and neglect, there were programmatic concerns, and the recommendation was for cultural sensitivity training, and that has taken place. So just making sure that at the district level, we monitor those responses to the concerns. And I know that was very technical, but I just wanted to give us an example of an improvement that was made, because ultimately what we want to do in the long term is be able to connect with our DCF partners and come together quarterly, for example, and identify, okay, so this is a trend, right? There's a trend in our schools around using this inappropriate language, right? So perhaps there's more to this programmatically, maybe it's systematically, maybe there's some additional training and capacity building that we need to do throughout the system. And so if we weren't monitoring that data, that information before, we are now.
Dr. Torres, it's just about 7:05. I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but sure hope we have a few more minutes for some other questions or comments in the group.
No? Yes.
About the buses. When I went to the HPS meeting, did I say it right? Hartford Public
Or Hartford Parent University. HBU? Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
there was a whole bunch of parents there, lots. Only person showed up was the two superintendents. The city council women. There was no one there that we needed to address. These people needed to address their questions to and their concerns. The parents that were addressing their concerns had some serious issues that happened to their babies. One 4-year-old got off the bus, had a slice down his face, and blood was coming off. But because there were no cameras on the bus, nobody could say what happened to that baby. Another baby neck got about broken. He had a brace sitting on the table. He got hit in the head with a box of bucks. What my question is why are there a lack of cameras at the schools and the buses so that when something happened, you can go back to that camera and see what happened? Everybody, I hear a lot, there were no cameras and no one saw what happened. I hear that a lot. Y'all do need to come to those Hartford Parent University meetings so y'all can hear these people's complaints, because the complaints may have not happened from 2006. They may not be in that 2006, 2016. It's some stuff that's happened in the last couple of years, and some of the parents are Hispanic, and they don't have the English, they don't speak the good English. Mm-hmm. So one of the state representatives, the state board of education leaders was there, and a lady got upset and was like, I'm mad at what's happening. The state board of education lady said, well, part of the problem is because the parents are not reporting. It's the parents' fault is they're not reporting. No, that's not true. The problem is that we're reporting, but nobody is checking back in with us. You can sit up and say, I need to see the principal. You call the principal. You send the principal email. She never pops up. She never shows up. You can't get that meeting with that person. You can't get that person to show up at all.
So you have a couple questions, and one is around cameras, and perhaps Dr. Colon-Rivera can speak to cameras in our buildings or the buses. But I want to let you know that if anyone makes a complaint and they feel that they were not heard or validated, go to the next level. Go to the next level, even if that means to the superintendent's office.
That was the problem with the last superintendent you had.
Okay, but guess what? because you and I had a great conversation tonight, this afternoon, right? Please make sure that you go to the next level. We're saying that we're holding everyone accountable, myself included. And if that means that you felt that you were not validated, we're here. The next person is here. In terms of cameras, I don't know if, and I'm not sure, by the way, what meeting you're referring to, but if there are meetings and Hartford Parent University meetings and concerns are raised, they certainly circle back to us. Hartford Parent University does let us know if there are concerns that were raised. Dr. Colon Rivas, I know the buses and cameras.
I
know
could tell
there's
you that the majority of the
inconsistency.
buses do have cameras, but I cannot tell you that all of the buses have cameras. So I will have to actually contact specialty and all of the other bus companies that we work with, especially with Capital Region Education Council as well. This is another set of contract that they have for bus transportation, and then get that information. But it's important, as Dr. Torres said, that if this type of information is being shared during Hartford Parent University, then bring it to our attention. It's just imperative. But thanks. We do have cameras inside schools and outside schools, and they're working. So you're talking about the outside building. Yeah. Absolutely.
The perimeter.
Thank you. I asked for cameras as part of the meeting that we asked for the gate and and I asked for those cameras in lieu of a third security guard because it costs less than to pay a security guard with benefits and everything, $63,000 a year. And I was told by the director of security for Hartford Public Schools at that time that they would have to get a whole new DVR system because they only have so many. But to me, our children's safety, that the incident with the little child walking out would have been resolved if we had the two things that I asked for specifically in that meeting. Monitors on the doors that beep and alert the office that someone left the building, and cameras all the way around, especially for this compound. A lot of stuff happens in this neighborhood, and it would be wonderful if we had cameras on the outside of this building. That is way cheaper, one-time cost, than getting another security guard here. And it's sustainable, and it works for community policing. It works for everything that we will need in this area. It's not that big of an investment when you compare it to a third security guard. So, I mean, I don't see why that is even a problem. We should no longer be having a discussion about it.
Dr. Colon Rivas, I see you taking notes. Thank you.
Okay. I'll give you my name and number.
But Vern, we know how to find you. I know where you are too. I'll come see you. Our Milner parents. Any other questions or comments? No? So I want to, again, thank you from the administrators that are here with us, our central office leaders, our central office staff, our community partners that are here. We remain committed to you in service of your children. So we continue to engage in the dialogue and to build our partnership moving forward. We do have another session next week. We hope to see you at
Journalism and Media Academy.
JMA. And that is on... No, the date. Wait, the date?
The 30th.
The 30th.
Thursday the 30th.
Wonderful.
Yes.
And so remember that that's a community conversation where we will have... Get it right. Hold on. We have 4 of them. We're so excited. Bulkeley High School. So those are the community conversations where we will have about 15 to 20 partners, community partners with us, engaging in conversation around abuse, neglect, and just, you know what, we're going to see what conversations come up. And we'll identify trends so that we can then identify as a district how is it that we're going to best serve our community. So we hope to see you there. And thank you to the Office of the Child Advocate, the advocate herself, Sarah Egan, and to the Department of Children and Families for joining us and being here tonight. Thank you, everyone.